much for joining me in this episode. I know we spoke back in summer 2020. It feels like ages.
Whole lifetime away ago.
I think a lot has happened. A lot has happened for you, hasn't there? Yeah. So obviously, to kick off, this is going to be a special episode because it's going to be part of our International Women's Day program, and you are our Woman of the Month. So I'm excited. I'm excited to be speaking with you. Honestly, I've always heard about Samantha Bod, but we've never had an opportunity to obviously meet. So definitely looking forward to this conversation with you. So for me, I want to get to know more about you, what or who inspired you to get into leadership positions. You're literally everywhere. So tell us.
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me. It's a real honour and a pleasure, I have to say. And as you rightly say, my life has changed a bit. You know, I had spent just nearly 11 years, actually, as the Chief Executive of the Students' Union at Bristol University of Bristol. And I kind of made a decision. I've been thinking about it for a bit, but during the summer, I kind of made a decision, partly, I think, on the back of all the activities that happened around sort of Black Lives Matters and George Floyd. And I kind of thought, you know, I've been working in my role as a leader, paying attention to inclusion, paying attention to race equity was really important to me. But I felt actually I'd come to a point where I wanted to really kind of step into the next part of my life and really kind of dedicate more time in that space. So I'm kind of now in this kind of what you might call a portfolio career.
Okay.
So I'm doing some consultancy, race equity consultancy particularly. I sit as a board advisor for a number of boards. I'm also at the moment actually on a part-time basis, I picked up the role of the NUS UK Director. So that's the campaigning side and public affairs and press, etc. Yeah. And I've actually also just started, which is quite exciting, particularly because it's this is a UE conversation, as the chair of the advisory board for the Faculty of Law and Business.
Amazing.
So I'm really excited about that because I am actually a UE alum. Inspired by my first undergraduate degree at King's London, but I did a GDL at UE, which is the diploma, the graduate diploma in law. Many years ago, but it was really transformational for me, and so I have a very soft spot for UE. I'm really pleased to be able to come in and hopefully use the skills that I have to help move it forward. But in terms of the question you asked about what inspired me to be leadership position, I suppose it's quite an interesting one. I think there's two things for me. I think there's a family context. So I come from, my mother's French, my father's was from the Caribbean. And on both sides of my family, they're really strong women. My Caribbean family were very much, whilst in some ways that's kind of quite a male-dominated kind of culture, really women were the people who kind of held the culture, held the family, and were really strong and, kind of, I don't know, I just saw lots of women, whether, aunts and cousins and what have you, just sort of carrying the family through and showing real leadership in a way that, and I always kind of sort of thought, oh, that's, that sounds like the right way to be. But I think the other thing for me, and whilst there are some issues around single-sex education, I actually went to a girls' school from the age of 7, convent school.
Oh, wow.
And so I was brought up in an, education in an environment where it didn't actually even dawn on me that as a woman I might not be able to be a leader, because all I saw was women teachers, nuns, whatever, and they were women in leadership positions, and they inspired us to just, the assumption is that we'd be able to do what we wanted to do. And I, in a school environment, I was deputy head girl and things like that. So even while I was still being educated, I was having these opportunities and these experiences of leadership. And I suppose I kind of then, sort of stepped into the big wide world with this expectation. And why can't I do this? And I suppose it was quite interesting when you did step in, and then that was the first time I started to realise, well, wait a minute, actually, being a woman, being a black woman, there's all these barriers. People aren't seeing the world quite the way that I did. But nevertheless, I think having that confidence and having had that experience so early during my kind of, developmental years, was really the thing that inspired me and set me off really for, you know, the rest of my life.
Amazing, amazing. I'm quite interested in like how you get to manage all the different responsibilities you have in different organizations, one. And secondly, I think a lot of us females get put down, obviously, as we grow older, to the barriers that society presents. So is it just confidence, or is there something else as females we need to be thinking about?
So I think, yeah, there is something about confidence, and confidence, it's easy to say, oh, just be confident. I mean, you know, sometimes you have to fake it till you make it. Do you know, sometimes you've got to, you know, on the inside, you're going, oh, and the imposter syndrome and that little person on your shoulder going, I can't do this, I'm rubbish, or whatever's there. And you have to kind of silence that voice. And you sometimes have to step into spaces. I call it sometimes that mask of leadership, where you almost kind of step into that space. And, you know, it might sound very sort of, superficial, but I use clothes for that. You know, sometimes I use clothes as my uniform, you know, and if I'm going into a meeting or what have you, I think, right, okay, what do I need to look like, to feel like, to kind of, you know, and I step into that space and wear the right clothes, and then that helps me to perform the part. And then as you perform it, it becomes you, and it becomes, it's a cycle, really, if that makes sort of sense.
I love that, yeah.
You know, but I think, you know, it's quite interesting because, you know, you kind of alluded to the fact that you've got this, you know, we know that there sexism exists, etc. But I think when you overlay that also with ageism, because I think there is something really true about women, you know, you get past a certain age and you just become invisible, you know, you're this invisible person. So, you know, one of the ways to kind of battle invisibility is, for me, wear red lipstick, walk into the room. Oh, do you know what I mean? I will not be invisible.
I love that, yeah.
So these are just little, you know, techniques, and everyone will have their own thing, but it's about, you know, finding that thing that gives you confidence, finding that thing that helps you to, you know, you know, we've all kind of been in spaces where we feel uncomfortable. We've also been in places where we feel comfortable, and I kind of quite like this idea of, you know, if you're going into somewhere where you haven't, you know, been there before, the confidence is almost to kind of put your mind at, when was the last time I did feel good? I felt confident. I felt comfortable. I'm in a completely different space, but also to kind of be thinking about that. It's almost a bit of self-hypnosis. And then that helps you, I think, get into the right space to then, you know, enter into this new environment, perhaps, as it might be if you're feeling kind of, you know, insecure and what have you. Yeah, and I think you said earlier as well, you started with a question about, you know, how doing lots of like that portfolio, doing lots of different things. And I think that's that kind of, you know, that multitasking skill, because actually, again, you know, I don't like to stereotype, but, you know, we do often talk about women do inherently have the ability to multitask.
Exactly.
And I think that can help you actually in your career as well, that ability. So, okay, even at the moment, okay, I'm doing lots of different roles, but as a chief exec or a senior leader, you have to have the ability to be able to juggle a number of things at once, to be able to be thinking about lots of things at the same time. But also being able to kind of, I think, have that ability to not always be a perfectionist, because I think sometimes we want to be in control of everything and understand it all. Whereas if you're kind of actually got a strategic overview, your role really is being able to see where those linkages are. It's not necessarily about being the kind of person who's all over the detail. That, you know, you have people around you, people who are experts. They're the experts of the detail, but it's how do you kind of, you know, create an environment where they can kind of really operate the best that they can, and you are, you know, you're the person hopefully keeping that going. And as I say, you know, so that's the skill that you're bringing, really. It's not about necessarily being in the detail. And then I think when you're talking about having, say, a career like the moment I've got now, where I'm doing lots of different things. I mean, for me, I like it because I like the variety, but also I like the fact that you're learning from these different sectors, different organizations, and it's cross-fertilizing, and it's a bit like, you know, sometimes I feel like a bit like a bee. Do you know what I mean? You're kind of going here and you're taking your pollen to the next place, and you're planting all these ideas, and I love that. I find that, you know, really, it energizes me.
Growing up, I can't remember who said it, but once they said it, it stuck with me. Variety is the spice of life. And anytime anyone would ask me, oh, what do you want to do, what do you want to be, I have like a whole list of different things that I mention because I just don't want to sit down doing one thing. So I absolutely love your mindset, Sam. I really love it. And the red lipstick, I would not wear red lipstick like during the day, but you have changed my mind now. You have changed my mindset. So
I've been wearing red lipstick every day since I was about 18. And probably I still continue. I'm always searching for the perfect red lipstick. And Pat McGrath, the crimson one, the latest one, is amazing. If you like red lipstick, go to
I don't have, okay. I hope he's not going to bring
She's a black woman.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a black woman who's just got an OBE. She's a makeup artist.
Oh, wow.
And she does amazing lipstick.
I'll check it out.
That's the sign.
The red lipstick I have is Ruby Woo, and that's about it. But I need.
Right, I'll do.
So my next question is, with the theme of this year's International Women's Day being choose to challenge, I'm really interested to knowing how you choose to challenge gender bias and inequality in the different organizations that you sit in.
So I think it's interesting. I think for me, particularly in any kind of leadership role, what you pay attention to is really important. And I've always genuinely had a passion around inclusion, and that's that gender, race, sexuality, all the characteristics. And I think it's about really sort of making it really clear that's what's important to me, that's what I'm going to be looking out for. So then people you're setting a tone, you're setting a culture of expectation. And so, for example, in terms of sort of challenging sort of gender bias, and I think the question you said, wasn't it, about what do you choose to challenge?
Mm-hmm.
So say thinking about sort of the role of women in the workplace, and we know that often women carry the kind of domestic burden, the kind of emotional labour of that balance. And I think quite often, absolutely rightly, in organisations we're kind of thinking about, okay, what can we do to make things better for women, which we do. But I think also, if you're going to make it better, it's also about paying attention to what the messages are we say our expectations for men, for example, who are, say, fathers. So when I've worked in organisations and say when I was working in the union, it's really important for me to make sure that fathers do take their paternity leave, that men are encouraged to also do part-time work if they want to do it as well. Because I think actually, unless we kind of encourage men to take their fair share, or give them the opportunity, and again, often it's not because they don't want to, but culturally they think they ought to, but say actually give them permission to also invest in their family life, then actually we won't be able to kind of really help women, because they'll still be, it's about how do we share it. So for me, it's about sometimes flipping over. So we're talking about gender equality, yes, we're talking about women, but also we're talking about what does that mean for men, and how are we making sure that men are able to also contribute? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I wonder how many women conferences you've been to. I've not been to any myself, but I think that predominantly you would find females in that space. And I've always wondered, for the change that we're seeking, don't we need these men in the room understanding, what needs to be changed and how they can actually be part of that change? Because constantly having just female-focused conferences, I don't know, I've just not, it's not just sat well with me, because I'm like, if they don't understand and they don't get to sit in that room where they get to know how they can engage and make a difference, then how do we move forward?
I think there's room for everything, because I think there is actually some real value in kind of female only or women only spaces. I think, as I said, as I described my education experience, I think there is there is room for that, and for some women that's really important, because that's where they feel safe to be able to really kind of open up. So I think there's a room for that. But I also agree with you, there is something about also how do we get men to be part of these conversations, because quite often they're the ones who still hold the power. So actually, we've got to engage them in understanding and empathizing and being allies of the cause for women, so that they will then kind of understand why it's important they start to kind of share that power or invite us to the table and what have you. So I think that I don't think I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can have all of those,
But
but that, yes, we do need to create those spaces where men can actually, and, you know, I know a lot of men who are, you know, genuinely believe that it's important that we have an equal society and want to be able to kind of contribute to that conversation, but don't always know how to. So I think there's something about how do we kind of, you know, invite them in and encourage that. Yeah.
And in some of your executive positions, that's what you do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
So far in your experience, have there been like any situations where you've had the most challenging experiences because you're a female in that professional space? I know that there are a few females who might be finding it difficult trying to navigate some of the challenges that they're currently facing. So have you ever, you know, experienced any bad or challenging experience in the workplace? And what would be your advice to females currently experiencing such things?
Well, I think, you know, I'm kind of reflecting. I mean, certainly when I was earlier in my career, really regularly the kind of thing would happen is, you know, you're sitting in a room, maybe someone's coming into the room and there's men in the room and there's you, and they will automatically just assume that the men are the managers and that you're not, and they kind of, you know, and you have to kind of say that actually it's me, and that's so frustrating. That happens a bit less now, but what still happens, particularly in spaces with new people, or, you know, and you're kind of starting, particularly now going into kind of new roles, and I'm just kind of, you know, perhaps I'm not known as well as I have, you know, I've spent 11 years in a particular sector. I found myself sometimes in those situations where you know, you say something and there's silence, and then 3 minutes later a man says exactly the same thing, and everyone goes, oh yeah, that's really interesting, Bob, you know, and it's like and so many women will tell you that, and, you know, and I say I find it a little bit surprising because I haven't had it for a while, and it's like, and then realizing that's happened. And I think it's about, sometimes just about having the confidence to call it out, you know, because sometimes when it first happens to you, you just kind of go, oh, I won't say anything then, or maybe I said it wrong or whatever. And again, your internal voice often kind of thinks, oh, it must be something I've done wrong. But actually, I think sometimes it's quite cultural, and it's, you know, people respond to when men say things. And sometimes you have to call it out and just say, well, actually, that's exactly what I just said, or actually, you know, or
yeah. Oh my gosh.
Have you ever had any sort of experiences like that?
Yes, yes. I remember when that happened, I left that meeting thinking, wait, is there something in the way I said it? Is it my accent? Like, what is it? Like, did I have water in my mouth when I was trying to say it? But that is the exact same thing I just said. And someone repeated it and they're acknowledging what he said rather than what I said. And I'm like, okay, maybe it's me. Oh, that is interesting, Sam. Oh my goodness. I really left that meeting thinking, okay, it has to be something wrong with me.
It happens. So honestly, you speak so
Oh
many, it
my
happens. And I just, as I
goodness.
say, I think hopefully the world is changing, it's happening less, but it still happens. And I think it can also happen. I think it can be about age as well, because sometimes as women, we get infantilized a little bit, I think sometimes, or if you're in a situation where perhaps the men in the room are older, there's all sorts of factors. But I think ultimately we have to call it out. We have to kind of, you know, name it and you know, own what we said, and make sure that other people recognize our contribution.
Yeah, yeah. Amazing, amazing. So when thinking about females like myself that are trying to get into, you know, leadership positions, what would be your advice? What's your advice for the next generation of female leaders? Because Sam, best believe a lot of people are looking up to you. You have done fantastic, and your profile is huge. And I'm just in awe of, like, you know, all that you do. Honestly. So what would you tell us? What would be your advice to us?
Well, thank you anyway for all those things I say firstly. Do you know what I think? And again, it's going to sound really easy, but I think it's about believing in yourself. And you've probably heard this term about kind of authentic leadership, about being authentic. I think that, you know, for me, being a leader is about really knowing who you are, being honest with yourself about who you are, because then you can then start to understand what your own strengths and your weaknesses are, and then you start to build people around you who perhaps, you know, that's not really my strength. I'm going to bring someone into my team who can, you know, who can kind of mitigate against that.
Okay.
And then that's how you start to kind of build real, I think, relationships, really empowered relationships, because you really value what other people bring to it. But you can only do that, or bring to the team or to the project. You can only do that if you're really honest with yourself about who you are, and you lead from that kind of authentic space, because also it's massively exhausting if you're trying to be somebody that you're not. So I think there's something about, you know, loving yourself in a way. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit about sort of self-love, and that, I think that's really important. But I think there's also something else I think I would also say is, I think again with women, I think often we are kind of conditioned from a really young age to be good, be a good girl, be perfect. And so we can't always want to be perfect. So quite often, I think we sometimes hold ourselves back because we don't want to go and do something until we're 100%. We've done it. We know we're 100%. And I think actually, and what I've noticed, particularly through my career, is quite often men don't operate like that. If they're 40% there, they'll go for it. Do you know what I mean? And I think we've got to be a bit more like that. You know, just kind of don't wait to be perfect. You know, just sometimes kind of feel uncomfortable and lean into the discomfort. It's okay. You see a job and you go, right, okay, well, I understand the job, and I can demonstrate I can broadly done these things, and maybe I can show that I've done some of the some of it through, not through work, but I can show transferable skills. I'm going to give this a go. And I think there is something about that, is stepping into the discomfort and not being kind of a massive, you know, sort of perfectionist, really. And I think there's something about also asking for help as well. Again, sometimes you sort of feel like, oh, is that a weakness or whatever? But, you know, asking for help. You know, I try and mentor people if I can. I try and try and be a sponsor, for example. So, you know, I've worked with some young women, particularly in the sort of higher education sector. And what I've tried to do there is not just sort of like just sit and listen to what they've got to say, but if I can open doors, if I can see a link and just say, look, why don't I introduce this person? And I think increasingly people are understanding that role of sponsor. So again, I think if you see somebody that you think, oh, actually I like what they're doing, or I'm interested in that role, ask them. They're going to say, they might say no, but you know, reach out and ask and say, can I talk to you about how you got to that job? Or, you know, would you give me some advice? Or actually just tell me about your career, because people love talking about themselves. Do you know what I mean? And then you're starting to kind of build a relationship there. And then that might then lead that person to say, oh, actually, I might be able to help you. I might be able to open that door for you. So yeah, not to be scared to ask for help and seek out people that you want to find out more about what they did, because you might think actually that could be the sort of direction I want to go down.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that. Growing up, one thing that my dad used to say in our language when I translated is, he who always asks questions would not miss his way or her way. So always ask questions. But, you know, in this society, sometimes in certain spaces, I sometimes feel like asking questions may come across as I have no idea of what I'm doing or where I'm going. But I think above all things, it's easier to ask questions rather than pondering about whatever it might be. So that's strong. Thank you, Sam. Thinking about in a world where you could change whatever, you had the power to change whatever you wanted, what would that thing what would that thing be?
I suppose I think, you know, on a big level, for me, inequality, the you know, the lack of level playing field. You know, we're really fortunate. Look, you know, you're at university, I've been to university. I know that at the end of the day, I'm surrounded by so many privileges, really. But, you know, I've in the past, I've worked in schools and things where I've kind of seen children, really bright young people with potential, but their circumstances, social circumstances, put so many barriers that they are not able to kind of, you know, override those barriers. And so for me, if I could like wake up tomorrow with my magic wand, I'd have everybody on the same level playing field. That's what I'd love.
Amazing.
And I guess, you know, we're all sort of striving to try and make that happen in our own ways, aren't we?
Yeah. And what is that one thing, or how many, depending on how much you want to tell us, what is that thing that a lot of people don't know about you? Because we can all access your profile, but what is that thing that we don't know about the amazing Samantha Budd? Search deep.
What sort of thing? Well, I suppose something that's kind of, I don't know if that's, but I was actually, when I was 21 years old, British karate champion.
Okay, do you still do that? When did you stop playing karate?
Anymore.
Yeah, of course.
I probably started in my mid-20s, but I started when I was about 12, 13. More than anything, because I just thought actually quite useful thing to be able to do self-defense and whatever. Then I really got into it. And ended up being the UK champion. So that's a thing, I suppose.
That is a thing. Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Sam. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. You are a delight. It's just amazing speaking to you one-on-one. Yeah.
Oh, and it's been an absolute pleasure and an honor, and lovely speaking with you too. So thank you very much for inviting me for that.